Alright, first topic ahead of us is dissecting cybersecurity's biggest threat: black hat hackers. Without them, cybersecurity wouldn't even need to exist. But we already know that not all hackers are bad. We have bad hackers and we have good hackers. Both of them exist in large number and they are everywhere on the internet. Bad hackers are there to inflict damage, while good hackers are there to protect and secure. But it's time we start using real terms for this that we're already introduced to. Let's refer to bad hackers as black hat hackers and to good hackers as white hat hackers. Since we already know what both white hat and black hat hackers intend to do on the internet, let's move our focus on the black hat hackers since it's much more important to understand the bad guys. Let's dissect black hat hackers by their main motives as well as by their personality traits. Now, it's important to mention that not all the black hat hackers will have these traits and these motives, and sometimes they can be rather deceiving both in real life and in cyber world. But most of them will, however, have some of these traits and motives. Okay, let's talk about the motives first. One of the most obvious one would be monetary or financial gain. As everyone else in this world that works for money, so do the black hat hackers. They just decided to use their skills for bad cause and to earn money illegally by hacking and phishing other people and companies. This is simply due to their desire to earn more money faster. With illegal hacking, a lot of money can be made, and that is why some people with hacking skills turn to the bad side. Some of the hackers don't even have to do their illegal activities themselves in order to earn money. For example, they can code their own exploits and tools that they will later sell to other people on the deep web market who will later use it for illegal stuff. One of the most common and dangerous ways that allows black hat hackers to earn, or better say steal money, is by releasing a ransomware. Now, ransomware is something that we will talk about rather soon, but it simply infects and encrypts the target's data and then asks for money in order to decrypt that data. Another motive that hackers have is simply to control things. This can be for many purposes, such as just the joy of controlling other people's devices and being able to spy on them and steal their data at any time, but also it can be used to run different attacks such as DDoS attacks. Another thing that motivates some hackers is power, or also political power. This one is a no-brainer. Political wars are being fought on every field, including cyberspace. Sometimes, even the country can be standing behind a strong hacking group and give them all the resources they need in order to run the attacks against other organizations or countries. This is not that uncommon, and later in the course we will mention some of the attacks that happened between different countries in cyberspace. And another common motive that some hackers have is simply to destroy everything they can. This destructive mode can be tied with some other motives, but it can also be the only motive out there. Some hackers are just not happy with the world and tend to destroy everything they can. Besides these, there are other motives as well, such as religious motives or greed and curiosity, but these ones are the most common. And just to mention that entire time, we're only referring to the black hat hackers. As far as coming to their personality traits, we can point out a few. Now, since crime is itself an act of rebellion against laws, we can say that most of the black hat hackers are rebellious. They can form organized hacking groups or cyber crime support structures. These groups or structures bring like-minded people together, and they can be highly effective since all the members already disregard law. Some of the black hat hackers also have inferiority complex, and an inferiority complex is where an individual lacks self-esteem, doubts their own capabilities, and feels that they do not measure up to some standards. such a person will feel weak, and to compensate for this, they will try and do something to prove that they're strong. Some hackers have these social characteristics, and this makes them very dangerous. Another trait is that they can be radical. This mostly applies to cyber terrorists and hacktivists. Hacktivists are radical and will do anything to overhaul what they do not like. This can also be tied to political cyber war, but it doesn't necessarily have to. And another thing or trait that black hat hackers have is a lack of social support. This one is also common, but not always the case. In some research, this was stated. It was said that cybercriminals lack social skills, and as a consequence, they fail to associate with people who can give them the social support that they need. Okay, now that we dissected the black hat hackers, their traits and motives, we can move on to showing most common attacks that they perform and how they work. But before we do that, I just want to mention that there is another type of hackers which is called gray hat hackers. Gray hat hackers are neither white hat or black hat. The best definition of them is that a gray hat is a computer hacker or computer security expert who may sometimes violate laws or typical ethical standards, but usually does not have the malicious intent, typically, that a black hat hacker has. Nonetheless, that's about it for this video, and let's move on to the next lecture where I will show you a couple of attacks that are common out there in the cyber world. Hello and welcome back. In this video, I just want to quickly show you some of the attacks that are common by black hat hackers. Now, we're going to cover two of the most common types of the attacks. The phishing attack, where the target is pretty much tricked into submitting their private information into a fake web page, and we're going to cover how a black hat hacker can infect a target with a Trojan. Now, Trojans and malware is something that we will talk about in more details in the next lecture, but here we will just showcase the most simple example of it. Okay. Let's start off with the phishing attack first. So what I currently have on my screen is a virtual machine called Kali Linux. Now, if you're coming from my ethical hacking course, you're more than familiar with all of the tools that we will cover and the Kali Linux operating system itself. But if this is the first course on hacking and cybersecurity for you, Kali Linux is simply an operating system that is specifically made for ethical hackers and penetration testers. The reason is because it comes already with many tools pre-installed that hackers use, and it pretty much makes our life easier. Nonetheless, more about this later on. For now, let's just show the attacks real quick. So what I'm going to do to run the most simple phishing attack is I'm going to use a tool called Black Eye version 2. All I have to do, and you will notice how easy this is, so pretty much anyone with a little bit of knowledge can do this, which makes it even more dangerous. All I have to do to run this tool is to type this command: sudo bash and then the tool name. It will ask me for my Kali Linux password, and that's about it. Now, what I have to choose from is these websites right here. And what this tool will do is whichever website I choose out of all of these 37 options, is it will create a fake page that will look almost identical to the real page. That way the target won't really notice the difference and they might submit their username and password into our fake page. Let's go with Instagram. So what I have to do is I have to type number 1 since it's tag number 1, press enter, and just wait for this tool to set everything up. Once the tool sets everything up, there are two ways that we can access this fake page. We can use the link generated by ngrok and send it to our target, and we can also go and visit the link on our localhost. If I type localhost, it will load the page, or should I say the fake Instagram page, where it will prompt the user for specifying their email address and the password. As you may notice, this does look pretty legit if you look at the page itself, But what we can notice is that the link is kind of different. And this is number one thing that you should take a look at whenever you're entering your private information anywhere. Check whether the link is from the original website and that it is not a phishing link. This is usually the number one thing that gives away phishing attacks. Okay, let's say the target didn't notice that this is a phishing link, the phishing website, and they specified the username, let's say test@gmail.com, and the password, let's say the password is 123456, just for the purposes of this lecture. They click on login, don't save, the page will load. Back here in our terminal, you will notice that we actually got the account name and the password. So now we successfully stole this person's details, their username and their password. And the funniest thing is that the target might not even notice, because right now it loaded the official Instagram page right after they typed their credentials. The phishing page was made so that whenever they type in their credentials, it will automatically redirect them to the real page, as we can see right here by the link, where they might think right now that they perhaps typed something incorrectly. Perhaps they typed the password incorrectly, therefore it's asking them to log in again. Then they will log in again, this time it will work, and they will not think about this anymore. Now, do you see how easy this can get? And as you saw, it's not really hard to do. All you need to know is to download this tool, run it, and pretty much you're set to run a phishing attack. Now, of course, this is one of the most simple phishing attacks, but it can still trick some users. These phishing attacks can get much more complex and harder to notice, but for the purposes of this tutorial, we just want to show how they look like. Okay, let's move on to the second attack, which is simply running a Trojan on the target system. So to do that, we must first create it. And to create the most simple Trojan or malware, I simply used MSF Venom. I ran this command. So this is the command that I used. I used the MSF Venom tool to create the payload for Windows. The payload is using reverse TCP. In other sense, it's pretty much a reverse shell. The payload itself is called Meterpreter. I set my local host, the IP address of this machine, this virtual machine. I chose the port number to connect to. I set the platform of the target to be Windows, the file to be exe, since that is executable for Windows, and I named it shell.exe. I already created this program and it's right here on my desktop, as you can see right here. Now, this is also one of the most simple reverse shells that you can create. And this really isn't a Trojan, as we will learn in the next lecture once we talk about what exactly a Trojan is. But this shell.exe, which I also transferred right here on my desktop of Windows 10 target machine, can easily be transferred into a fake, let's say, PDF file or a fake image or pretty much any type of file that I want. I could have also changed the icon, making it seem like a legit program. But for this lecture, I'm not going to do that since that is out of the aspect for this section. What I want to do is simply just run it. We will learn in the next lecture that Trojans must be ran in order to infect the target. So in order to run it, I need to use something called a listener. Now, listener is simply something that will listen for the incoming connections. And don't worry if you don't know any of these tools, it doesn't really matter. I'm just showing here how simple these attacks can be. So once this tool is opened, all I have to do is set up my listener, set the payload to be the exact payload that I chose for my reverse shell, and set the local host or the IP address and the local port. Now once I press run, it will listen for the incoming connections on this IP and on this port. All the target has to do is to double click on this shell. And that's pretty much it. Now imagine that this was an image, or it appeared to be an image, and they just wanted to check it out to see how it opens up. And you will notice that nothing really happens. On the target machine, there's nothing that changed. It only appears as if this program didn't execute at all. But if I go back to my virtual machine, where I have Kali Linux running, you will see that we have session 1 opened. And if I run this command, get user ID, here we see that I am on the Windows 10 machine. And from here I can run whatever I want. I can run ifconfig to check out all the networking interfaces on the target machine. I can run dir command, and this command will simply print all the files on the target's desktop. As you can see, these files right here are these files right here. I can also enter a shell within this meterpreter session, and here I can pretty much type whichever command I want, and it will be exactly the same as if I was using the command prompt on the Windows 10 machine. Let's close this. And there are also some cool commands that I can run, such as screenshot, which will screenshot the target screen, and it will save it in the current directory that I'm at. It also gives the path where the screenshot is saved, so it's saved in this black eye directory. Let's go there. And here is the screenshot. Here it is. Now the screenshot might appear as if it's a screenshot from Kali Linux, but that is only because I'm running my Kali Linux virtual machine on the Windows 10 target machine. You can see that it actually took a screenshot of the Windows 10 machine because here are the Windows icons down there. So there is no limit as to what I can do right now on the target machine. I can spectate a webcam, I can listen on the microphone, I can change files, upload files, download files, delete files, steal all the files. I can do pretty much anything that I want. And all the target had to do is double click this program. And on their desktop it appears that nothing else is happening. Okay, you get the point. These are the two most common attacks out there by black hat hackers. And you notice how easy it is to run some of them. Not to mention that we only ran the most simple attacks in this lecture, and even these simple attacks can be effective against some people. Nonetheless, this was just a small demonstration, and now let's move on to discussing and dissecting malware in the next lecture. See you there. Malware, the number one tool of black hat hackers. Most of you already know what a malware is and what it stands for. Malware is simply a short word for malicious software, and it's something that has been existing for decades. Malware's main goal is to compromise confidentiality, integrity, and availability of the system that they are targeting. Malware itself has its own categories. There are many types of malware out there, and not all of them intend to do the same thing. Nowadays, however, many malware you encounter will have multiple functions and multiple tasks, while before, usually malware had just one intent. In this lecture, it's time we dissect different types of malwares and explain what each of them does. First of all, let's start with the most common one, which is Trojan. A Trojan is a malware that relies on social engineering. It represents as one thing or one type of a file, while in reality it's something else completely. It can appear to be as an image or a PDF file or whichever file type best suits the target and which the target will most likely execute. Now, in most cases, it has many things that can give it away as a Trojan and not the file that it appears to be. But for example, to a regular person, these things are not noticeable. Once Trojan is executed by the target, it can do many things such as steal the data on that system, run different programs, it can set itself to be as a backdoor for any future connection. This is dangerous because if Trojan has backdoor, then it is enough to execute it only once for the hacker to have complete access to it whenever he wants in the future. Another type of malware that is usually even more dangerous is worm. What makes worm so dangerous? Well, it's the fact that worms usually exploit unpatched vulnerabilities. This means, unlike Trojan, who must be executed in order to run, a worm provides its own delivery mechanism so that it can actually automatically spread from system to system. Worms are potentially able to infect any machine in the world that is connected to the internet, and when it's exposed to some of the unpatched vulnerabilities that the worm exploits. This is especially dangerous if the attacker discovers a zero-day vulnerability on a widely spread software or protocol that most machines implement. In theory, if that machine is not protected by any additional firewall or security measure, it can be infected by the worm by just being connected to the internet. Another dangerous malware out there is ransomware. Ransomware is something that you also might have heard about, as it's becoming more and more popular recently. Ransomware is simply a malicious program that, when executed on your system, encrypts all of your data and asks for money in order to decrypt that data. Usually this money is provided in crypto, since it's far more difficult to track than fiat, and it will give you a couple of days to pay for the ransom before destroying all of your data on that system. The next one you probably have heard about, as many people refer to malware, being simply a virus. Now, viruses have been around for decades, and in many cases they are simply just self-replicating file infectors. Nowadays, they are less popular than before, but some attackers are still finding creative ways to run viruses. Now we come to perhaps the most dangerous malware for a single system, and that is a rootkit. Rootkit is a malicious program designed to give unauthorized access to a system or a software. Well, you might be asking now, what is the difference between a rootkit and, for example, a Trojan? Well, rootkits are hidden deep inside the operating system, and they can commonly be very, very hard to remove, and in some cases close to impossible to remove. Not only that, but they can sometimes be very, very hard to detect as well. And last but not least, we have spyware. Now, spyware is simply a program that is used to spy on you, as its name says. This can be for many purposes, and sometimes it's even combined with something called adware. Spyware can spy on things you visit and look on the internet, and adware will show you these ads in order to get you to buy something. These are pretty much the most common types of malware out there. And what's also important to mention is the ways that it can spread. There are 5 most common ways that the malware spreads. It can spread through unpatched vulnerabilities, security misconfigurations. It can spread to weak, leaked, and stolen credentials. It can spread through social engineering, and it can always spread if there is an insider threat. Now that we covered different types of malware that black hat hackers use, and we mentioned how they usually spread, I will leave some additional resources right after this lecture, and let's discuss in the next lecture, is there anything that we can do to simply stop the hackers? Okay, so the important question arises. In the world where black hat hackers tend to attack and destroy, is there anything we can do about that? Well, we already know we can prevent them in many cases, and we will cover certain methods of stopping and preventing attacks, but then comes the next question. Can we actually catch them? Well, this can be a lot harder than preventing them. Plus, there are certain factors to take into consideration when catching a black hat hacker. These would be 3 main things. First one is how good a hacker is. This one is of course important because if a hacker is just running some scripts and has no idea what he is doing, then eventually he will leave trace and clues behind, which will lead back to him. The second thing, and probably the biggest reason hackers get caught, is because they are careless. Or should I say they become careless with time. Some of the biggest black hat hackers got caught due to not being careful enough and after a certain time, they don't feel threatened, so they don't pay attention to small details like they did before. Nowadays, you can get traced due to many reasons, not using, for example, layered spoofing protection, not using proxies, or not anonymizing your scans and your exploits. Perhaps visiting a physical location too often from where you run these attacks can also lead to you getting caught. And another funny thing that might get a hacker caught is disclosing important information on social media. And this one is a no-brainer, but don't brag about things that you did illegally. It will eventually lead to you getting caught. But anyways, that's what makes a cybersecurity expert's life easier, right? Now, the reality is that 90% or more of hackers don't ever get caught, as long as they don't try to inflict a massive damage and as long as they don't try to attack governments and big companies. They never really get caught since it is not possible to keep an eye on every cyber attack that happens. And last thing is that it's also important what exactly they did on the system that they hacked. The more action you perform on the target, the higher the probability that you left a trace behind, which can later be used to find you. That's why far more important thing than trying to catch a hacker is trying to prevent a hacker from actually hacking the system. However, if your preventing strategy is all set, and you have set up all the security measures to secure your network, then you can focus further on actually figuring out when your network is being targeted and maybe even try to figure out by who. Several things will help you do this. I've picked up a few for now, and we will dissect all of them later in the course. These are having logs, setting up honeypots, and performing monitoring often. Now, each of these helps you out in both preventing an attack and figuring out at what time is attack taking place. First thing we have are logs. Logs help you in many things and not just in security. You can think of them as a book that keeps all the data regarding some server or some software. They can help you find if an error occurs somewhere, and they can also help you find whether the software that you're reading logs from is acting weird and perhaps not as it should be. This would be a good indicator that something is wrong and that someone might be doing something malicious. Next term that most of you who are new in cybersecurity probably haven't heard of yet are honeypots. Honeypots are systems that look similar to a real system which are set as a decoy for an attacker. Usually a honeypot server is purposely made vulnerable for an attacker to fall for. Honeypots should be well divided from the main assets, and usually they are equipped with logging and monitoring tools to help catch the hacker once he interferes with the honeypot. And this brings us to the third thing, which is monitoring. It literally doesn't matter if you have logging and honeypot set if you have nobody who is periodically taking a look at these logs and monitoring everything on the network. If nobody does this, then even if something is caught in the logs, it will go unnoticed since nobody took a look at it. Okay, now that we talked briefly about hackers in this section, it's time to move on to a little more technical section of this course where we are going to discuss vulnerabilities. See you there.